The film opens with Lucille, the lead character, sitting at the piano. Her mother-in-law, Madame Angelier, soon arrives and asks why Lucille hasn't changed. Lucille obliges, and she does so while her mother-in-law walks by a picture of her son and Lucille's husband, Gaston. The two of them drive to one of Gaston's properties, where Madame Angelier is teaching Lucille how to properly manage the properties and the tenants residing there. Lucille is instructed to remain silent so they can surprise the tenants, but she slams the car door, alerting the tenants to their arrival. Then, one of the tenants asks Madame Angelier if she has heard from his son because they haven't heard from their own sons who are fighting in the war. Céline, their daughter, responds that they can't pay because they can't manage their own farm without the sons. Madame Angelier then instructs Lucille to write it down for the next month before they depart. Later on, Madame Angelier mocks the tenants for being able to purchase silk stockings for their daughter but not being able to pay for rent. Afterwards, she witnesses several cars drive by and nearly collide with them. After purchasing several items, a large number of civilians begin to impede the raid, despite Lucille's suggestion that they turn around. And their vehicle is unable to pass through. Lucille descends the car to observe the length of the line of people. She is then asked by someone if his wife may rest in her car. Madame Angelier exits the car as planes begin to approach. Lucille inquires as to whether the planes are from them or the enemy, and the stranger's wife responds in the latter direction just before the planes bomb a nearby train. The civilians panic, and everyone, including Lucille and Madame Angelier, hides in the fields. The airstrike eventually targets the civilians. Lucille and Madame Angelier survive and swiftly depart the area, heading to the main city where there are still plenty of civilians who appear to be fleeing Paris. People flee, fearing another airstrike, but instead flyers announcing France's capitulation appear everywhere, frightening them so much that Lucille conceals her husband's belongings and Madame Angelier conceals some cash. After the priest informs Lucille and her mother-in-law that they should all unite under God before they pray, a German regiment arrives in their town. The soldiers then inform the soldiers that they will be living with the civilians. The two of them return home and wait for the soldier assigned to them, Bruno, to arrive. Bruno changes the clock and brings a dog with him. During dinner, Bruno asks for the key to the desk. In the piano, Madame Angelier coldly tells him that the maid will give it to him and then he leaves. When Lucille hears the piano being played downstairs, she knows it's time to go to bed. The next morning, Lucille walks to the town square with an unloaded shotgun and passes by an anti-Semitic poster. A local farmer's wife calls her to look at another poster informing them of the new rules. Lucille answers yes when she asks if anyone has been assigned to stay at their house. The woman tells her that they don't, and that's a benefit of not having a nice house. Lucille then asks Céline the same question again. Céline then passes by and glares at Lucille, which confuses her. Then Madeleine informs her that Madame Angelier had forced them to live in the barn while welcoming a Parisian refugee into the home and paying double the rent. Once her mother-in-law begins to hoard, Madeleine's husband Benoit registers his firearm with the German soldiers. He then passes by their landlord and speaks to them dismissively, for which his wife chastises him. Eventually, Benoit negotiates with the Germans to move a German soldier named Bonnet from their own residence to Madeleine and Benoit Lucille. While walking home from buying supplies, Lucille gets catcalled in the streets. She then gives a small amount of it to Madeleine and her family after the German soldier moves into their home. During her visit, she eventually speaks with Bruno about music. Lucille informs him that she plays as well, but her mother-in-law won't let her until Gaston is present. Bruno then tells her about his marriage and his work as a composer, one of which is the music he plays every night. Lucille enters the piano room, which Bruno had converted into his office, and looks at his sheet music. He notices her spying and tells her to read a letter, explaining that he was assigned to read the tenant complaints before telling her to leave. Later that evening, Madame Angelier questions Lucille about why she married her son, accusing her of being gold digger. When she realizes that her mother-in-law had brought up the subject out of the blue, she asks why her mother-in-law had brought it up at all. She discovers that Madame Angelier had witnessed her being friendly with Bruno. Madame Angelier then begins to ran against the German troops and eventually informs Lucille that her husband's military unit is in a labor camp. Bruno then gives her the sheet music. She is then assigned by her mother-in-law to collect the rent. Meanwhile, the soldier who lives with Madeline's family has started to bother her. She discovers that he has tried to kill the soldier in the past but has not followed through. Later that night, he asks Lucille and Bruno to take action to protect Madeline. After talking and sharing some wine, Bruno starts acting passive-aggressively toward Lucille. When Lucille whispers to him, "I'll try to do something about it later," Bruno changes his tone and tells Benoit that he'll try to address the situation later. The two then dance together until the maid tells them that Madame Angelier is returning home, at which point they go outside to hide in the bushes. When Celine discovers that Lucille has been having sex with a German soldier in the forest after she steps on a branch, Celine reveals that Gaston has been having an extramarital affair and has fathered a girl named Simone. Angry with Madame Angelier for withholding her son's affair, Lucille allows herself to develop romantic feelings for Bruno. At Lucille's request, Bruno confronts Kurt over his harassment. Lucille's relationship with Bruno draws the hostility of many of the townfolk. The Viscountess de Montfort later catches Benoit stealing a chicken from her coop. When Benoit points a gun at her, she tells her husband, the collaborationist Viscount de Montfort, who sends German soldiers after Benoit. While hiding in a barn, Benoit kills Kurt with his gun and flees into the forest. The Wehrmacht launches a manhunt and give the townsfolk 48 hours to surrender Benoit. A Wehrmacht major takes the Viscount hostage and threatens to execute him if Benoit is not found. At Madeline's request, Lucille hides Benoit in the attic of the Angelier mansion with the help of the reluctant Madame Angelier. Despite a massive manhunt, the Germans fail to capture Benoit and the Viscount is executed by firing squad. As the Germans plan to withdraw from the town, Lucille takes part in a plan to smuggle Benoit into Paris, where the French resistance is gathering. She manages to convince Bruno to issue her a travel pass to Paris. However, Bruno's suspicious orderly suspects that Lucille is harboring Benoit and issues special instructions for the checkpoint guards to search her car. At the checkpoint, Benoit manages to shoot the German soldiers dead with his pistol but is wounded in the shoulder. Bruno arrives on a motorcycle. Lucille faces him with her pistol but is unable to kill him. To Lucille's relief, Bruno instead helps her lift the wounded Benoit into the car and allows them to escape to Paris. As she drives away, Lucille smiles at Bruno in gratitude. Lucille and Benoit later join the French resistance and help liberate France from the Germans.
Please subscribe for more movie